They didn't see his name. They didn't see the barcode scan green. They didn't even see the quiet Storm sitting in seat 2A. What they saw was a black man in dark jeans, no suit, no watch, no briefcase. And in their minds, that wasn't first class. So when Julian Cole boarded Flight 708 with nothing but a soft leather duffel and silence in his voice, they assumed he was lost. Or worse, pretending. "Sir, first class is to your left," the attendant said, her smile already tight. "This is first class," he replied, showing the boarding pass. She didn't look. She didn't need to. Not in her world. What followed in the next 27 minutes would unravel an entire crew's career, tilt an entire cabin's perception, and expose something far more dangerous than a booking error. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about who gets to be believed and who gets erased, in plain sight. Before we step inside that cabin, inside that moment, if you believe stories like this matter, if you know that sometimes power doesn't shout, it just sits still until justice finds its voice, then hit like, subscribe, and tell us what would you have done. Sitting in Julian's seat, would you speak? Stay quiet or stand with him? Let's find out together. Gate G12 was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet just before something shifts. Outside, the tarmac glistened in late winter light. Inside, a man waited, not to be seen, but to witness. Julian Cole adjusted the strap of his duffel, slipped the boarding pass back into his pocket, and stepped onto the jet bridge. Row 2A was waiting, but so was something else. Chapter 1. The Man in Seat 2A begins now. At gate G12, the world moved like it had somewhere better to be. Shoes clicked on linoleum. Soft jazz floated from overhead speakers. A child somewhere cried, then fell silent. But none of that reached Julian Cole. He stood near the window, phone dark in his hand, watching the belly of the aircraft being loaded crate after crate stamped Cole Freight International. His name, his cargo, his flight. Still, no one noticed him. He wore no tie, no lapel pin, just a slate gray sweater, black jeans that had lived too many cities, and boots with soft creases from walking too far without needing to explain. No watch on his wrist, no ring on his finger, no noise. His boarding pass sat folded twice in his back pocket. Seat 2A, first class, confirmed, no upgrades, no favors, paid in full, under his real name. Because today wasn't about comfort. It was about watching what people did when they didn't know they were being watched. He had once read that power was not always loud, that sometimes it arrived wrapped in stillness, draped in soft fabric and quiet eyes. He carried that truth like currency. And yet, as the gate agent called for pre-boarding Group 1 first class, top-tier status, Julian did not move immediately. He waited, then walked slowly, as if measuring the weight of each step, as if the air itself might shift. When he reached the threshold of the jet bridge, the agent barely glanced up. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, handing him a polite smile, the kind reserved for someone who wouldn't make the headlines. She didn't know yet, and neither did the crew inside. 1.2, sir. First class is to your left. Julian stepped into the cabin like a man entering a memory. Leather seats curved in quiet symmetry. A curtain swung gently between luxury and the rest of the plane. The air smelled of orange peel and privilege. He paused near row 2, adjusted the strap of his duffel, and looked toward his seat. That's when she stepped into his path. She wore confidence like a pressed blazer, blonde hair tucked into a regulation bun, clipboard in hand, smile practiced. "Sir," she said, her voice flat with the kind of politeness that means the opposite. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Julian blinked once. "I know," he replied, voice even, low. He reached slowly for his back pocket and unfolded the pass. Seat 2A. The woman, her name tag said C. Martin didn't reach for it, didn't glance at the barcode. Her eyes skimmed his sweater, his jeans, the creases in his boots. She was reading not the ticket, but the man. "I'm afraid this seat isn't yours," she said, tone cool but firm. "We've had issues lately. People printing fake confirmations." Julian said nothing at first. He held the pass steady, like offering truth to someone who preferred illusion. "You can scan it," he said. Martin didn't move. Instead, she lifted a hand to gesture toward the galley. "Brad," she called. A tall man with a tight smile and rolled-up sleeves appeared. He looked Julian up and down like sizing up a returned product. "This gentleman claims he's in 2A, she told him. Brad let out a half-laugh. "Really, that's a first. 1.3. That's a fake printout. We've seen this before." The two of them stood like gatekeepers to something sacred. And Julian, despite the pass in his hand, had become an intruder in their eyes. A breach in the aesthetic. "Sir," Brad said, stepping closer, "I'm going to ask you again. Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Julian's jaw stayed loose. He handed over both his boarding pass and his ID, a clean Illinois license with holographic watermark. No phrase, no smudges. Brad barely looked at it. "I've seen this before," he muttered, shaking his head. "Same thing happened in Dallas. Guy printed a pass at home and tried to walk into first like he belonged there." Martin nodded. "Exactly. We have to be careful. Protocol's tight after that incident." Julian's voice cut gently through the haze. "You haven't scanned anything yet." "We don't need to," Brad said. "That seat's reassigned. There's no record of you in 2A. "Then check the manifest," Julian replied, the edges of his tone still smooth. Martin bristled. "I don't have time to argue. We have VIPs boarding soon." At that moment, a well-dressed white couple stepped on, champagne flutes already in hand, platinum tags swinging from their necks. "Oh," Martin said, lighting up. "Mr. and Mrs. Eddington. Right this way." Julian watched as they were led past him into seat 2A. His seat, his hand still holding the pass, lowered slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push back. Not yet. He just looked around the cabin at the eyes beginning to watch, and the silence starting to hum. It was happening again. But this time, the ending would not belong to them. Julian stepped aside without being told. There was no scene, no demand, just that subtle choreography of erasure, the practiced shuffle that people like him had learned too well. Take up less space, nod, yield. He moved toward the bulkhead, holding on to nothing but the folded boarding pass and a breath he hadn't released. Behind him, the Eddingtons floated in. They didn't strut. They glided white, wealthy, wrapped in linen and light perfume, their hands cradling champagne like it belonged to them. The kind of people the airline built its ads around. "Welcome. Welcome," Martin cooed, her voice suddenly softened by status. "Your seats are just here, 2A and 2B. Julian heard that, loud and clear. As they slipped into the seats he had paid for, Julian stood a few rows back, near the emergency exit signage, watching, not glaring, just observing. Brad returned from the galley with a thin smile, speaking low but loud enough. "See, that's why we double-check. Can't be too careful these days." Julian didn't respond. He looked out the window instead, at nothing in particular. The air in the cabin shifted, not colder, not hotter, just heavier like judgment had a scent. A woman in row 3 noticed, her brow furrowed, her phone slid out of her tote bag. She began recording, not because she knew the whole story, but because something didn't feel right. Lena Foster wasn't supposed to speak. At 23, she was still technically in observation, a flight attendant in training assigned to shadow and stay silent unless prompted. She wore her regulation navy blazer over nerves that had not yet thickened. But she saw everything. She saw how Martin's body language changed when Julian entered, posture stiff, smile shallow, eyes scanning his clothes before his pass. She saw how quickly they dismissed the barcode, the ID, and how effortlessly the Eddingtons were ushered in without proof. She didn't know Julian Cole, didn't recognize him from magazine covers or press articles. But she knew that look, the one that said, You don't fit the furniture. Lena lingered by the service panel, one hand tightening around the edge of a tray. Her training told her not to get involved. Her instinct said otherwise. She had watched her father get pulled over for matching a description, had watched her brother get denied a bank loan because he wore sneakers to the meeting. This felt the same. Still, she stayed in place. Her mouth stayed shut, but her hand drifted into her blazer pocket, tapping the corner of her phone. Voice memo, record. Just in case. Across the aisle, the woman from row 3 was still recording. Her eyes met Lena's. Briefly, a look between strangers who recognized something wrong but didn't yet know each other's names. In the air above their silence, policy had a face, and it wasn't Lena's. Julian did not raise his voice. He didn't demand re-entry or throw the word lawsuit like a weapon. That would have been expected. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. It was matte black, like his card holder, like his boarding pass folder. Every item he carried spoke the same language. I don't need to prove myself, but I could. He tapped open a secure thread labeled R.H., the initials of his executive assistant, Rhonda Hayes, a former Air Force systems analyst turned logistics whisperer, the one person who knew what to do without being told twice. His thumb hovered for only a second before typing, "Update board," discreetly. Then, after a breath, Cabin 1, Horizon Flight 708, seat reassignment event. He hit send, slipped the phone back into his coat. No one noticed. Brad walked past him again without a glance. Martin poured more champagne. And the Eddingtons. They were already laughing at something no one else found funny. Julian leaned gently against the wall of the cabin, near the curtain dividing first class from the rest of the world. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was studying them. Every move, every glance, every script they had memorized about who belongs and who doesn't. He would give them room, enough rope, as the saying goes. And when the curtain finally lifted, it wouldn't be just a policy exposed. It would be a system. And they'd learn power doesn't always walk in wearing a tie. Sometimes, it waits in silence, wearing denim. Julian had been standing too long to still be invisible, and yet, that was the point. Brad approached again, this time with a clipboard and a half-hearted authority. "Sir, we really need you to take your seat in the main cabin." Julian didn't move. Instead, he opened his coat pocket once more and handed over the documents, not aggressively, not theatrically, simply, deliberately. A valid Illinois driver's license, a printed confirmation email with his name clearly typed, Julian D. Cole, Seat 2A, Horizon Flight 708, a digital boarding pass, stamped TSA cleared Amwan. Priority boarding. Brad scanned the page with bored eyes, barely pausing on the name. He didn't lift the pass to the handheld scanner, didn't scan the QR code, just skimmed as if trying to find a typo to justify dismissal. Martin appeared beside him, arms folded. "I've seen this template before," she muttered. "Looks real, but it's not. There's a trick they use with PDF editors. Can swap names." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You think I photoshopped a boarding pass?" Brad chuckled without humor. "We've had folks try. Saw one guy last month come in with a fake ticket to business, thinking we wouldn't notice. But you didn't scan this one." Brad shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Seats taken, reassigned. These kinds of errors happen more often than you think." Julian's voice, when it came, was quiet. He didn't speak to them, he spoke through them. "Errors don't tear tickets. People do." Martin flinched slightly. The words landed somewhere she hadn't prepared for. But she recovered quickly. "I'm just doing my job." He tilted his head, almost sympathetically. "I imagine that's what most people say, right before history proves them wrong." The galley curtain never fully closed. Inside, stainless steel countertops gleamed under fluorescent strips, and trays of untouched nuts sat stacked beside half-filled coffee pots. It should have smelled like routine. Instead, it carried tension. Brad leaned in toward Martin. His voice dropped, but not enough. Check his outfit. I mean, come on. Martin didn't respond immediately. She was busy tapping on the tablet in her hand, refreshing the seating chart, her fingers restless. He doesn't look first class, Brad continued, voice coated in faux amusement. No watch, no cufflinks, no luggage with tags. Probably just Googled a barcode and hoped it worked. Martin finally spoke. A murmur. We can't let him just sit there. What if someone important boards next? They didn't say white. They didn't have to. Brad laughed under his breath. Don't worry. We'll say the system glitched. Happens all the time. Behind the curtain, Lena had frozen. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but when your hands stop moving and your ears catch fire, you know what you've heard is meant to be remembered. Her heart beat so loud she thought it might echo, but they kept talking. I mean, what kind of CEO dresses like that? Brad scoffed. Martin smirked. Exactly. He knew what he was doing. These people always want to prove something. Lena blinked, not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. She backed away slowly, breath tight in her chest, words stuck in her throat. In the training manual they gave Lena during orientation, there was an entire chapter on protocol escalation. Clear steps, bulleted in bold. Never confront a senior staff member in front of passengers. Never interfere with a seat dispute unless asked. Always assume the system is correct. Lena had memorized those rules. She had nodded and signed and practiced the scripts. But now, standing beside the crew closet with her phone in her palm, the rules tasted like rust in her mouth. Because what she had just heard wasn't protocol. It was profiling neatly folded in the language of efficiency. She tapped open her voice memo app, hesitated. The light blinked red. Recording. She tucked the phone deep into her jacket and straightened her posture, even as her hands trembled. Outside the galley, Julian still stood calm, still immovable, the kind of stillness that made people nervous. Lena stared at him from the shadows, quietly terrified and quietly aligned. This wasn't a mistake. This was muscle memory from a system that had rehearsed this act so many times. It no longer recognized the cruelty in the choreography. In that moment, Lena understood something that shifted the floor beneath her. Policy was never neutral. It always had a face, and too often, it looked nothing like hers or his. Julian returned to his seat, or what should have been his seat. The armrest was still warm from the Eddingtons, who had claimed it with the nonchalance of entitlement. Now, he took the aisle seat across from them, not in defiance, not in surrender, just in presence. A quiet refusal to vanish. Martin hovered nearby, radio clipped tight to her belt. She pressed it once, twice, then spoke into it in hushed tones. Only a few words were audible. Non-compliant passenger, first class, no ID match. It wasn't a lie, not to her. Because in her eyes, the seat wasn't just about the ticket. It was about what someone like Julian represented: disruption, discomfort, an image that didn't fit the brochure. Brad appeared again, kneeling slightly beside Julian, the way people do when they want to appear kind while enforcing harm. Sir, I'm asking you one last time, he said, voice dipped in performative concern. This seat's been reassigned. We don't want to escalate. Julian said nothing, did nothing. He just remained seated, eyes forward, spine straight, like gravity had finally remembered his name. Brad exhaled and stood up. Martin was already on her way back to the gate. Security would be next. And still Julian didn't flinch. Because when you've spent a lifetime being told you're too much, too suspicious, too black, too loud, the most radical thing you can do is sit still. The first security officer arrived quickly, a woman in her mid-30s, tight ponytail, badge clipped to her belt, moving with the stiffness of someone trained to de-escalate but conditioned to assume guilt. She made no announcement, simply walked toward Julian and waited for someone else to speak first. Lena saw her arrive. From behind the curtain, she could feel her heart trying to outrun her courage. She stepped out. Small, worried but visible. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Martin whipped around, eyes narrow. Eilina paused, cleared her throat. I saw his ticket scan green. I was at the gate. It matched. Silence. The kind that cuts sharper than shouting. Brad was the first to react. "You're not authorized to comment on seating matters." Martin followed fast. "Lena, back to the galley. Now." But the security officer looked at Lena. Really looked. "Is that true?" she asked. Lena hesitated, not because she doubted what she saw, but because she knew what would follow. "Yes, I saw it with my own eyes." Martin stepped forward, lowering her voice to a hiss. "You're still in training. One more word out of place and you'll be benched. Understood?" Lena's face flushed, but she didn't move. Somewhere, a phone camera clicked. Somewhere, a hashtag began forming in someone's draft folder. And somewhere in Lena's gut, shame was turning into resolve. Julian hadn't spoken since he sat down. Not when they called him non-compliant. Not when they said reassigned. Not even when the champagne couple sipped in his seat, 4 inches from his name, erased on the crew's tablet. He simply watched. Not with fury, but with a kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable. The kind of stillness you only develop after decades of learning that rage gets policed more than lies. He turned slightly toward Lena, gave her a single nod. Not of gratitude. Not yet. But of acknowledgement, the kind you give to someone who stepped into fire without knowing if they'd burn or be believed. Then he looked at the seat, 2A, occupied, not just by bodies, but by assumption. The Eddingtons hadn't said a word to him, hadn't looked his way. But they sat taller now, as if proximity to scandal made them noble. Julian's fingers tapped his thigh once, a rhythm no one else could hear. 1 beat for every time a system chose perception over proof. Martin glanced at him, then at the officer, then back again. "What are we waiting for?" she asked, loud enough for passengers to overhear. The officer didn't answer right away, because something in the room had shifted. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about the man sitting in silence and the question now hanging above them all. What do you do when the person you're trying to erase refuses to disappear? It started as a whisper. A low voice from row 3, a man in a navy blazer, mid-40s, who had been watching since boarding. He leaned toward the aisle and said, not quite loud, not quite soft, "Let him sit. He has proof." Across from him, a woman clutching a baby nodded. "I saw the pass. It looked real." Another voice, this one 2 rows back. "Why won't they scan it then? Just scan it." Brad stiffened. Martin glanced around, suddenly aware that silence wasn't working anymore. The cabin had tilted. Not physically, but socially, the weight of opinions slowly moving away from crew control. The security officer, Officer Wilkes, looked increasingly hesitant. She wasn't drawing her radio. She wasn't reaching for his shoulder. She was waiting. Julian remained silent. Still seated, still calm, but no longer alone. Lena shifted near the galley entrance, unsure whether to step forward again. Her training said, stop. Her instinct said, continue. Passengers murmured now, not in panic, but in solidarity, that low current of civilian power rising slowly. Sentence by sentence. Martin barked back, "We're following FAA policy." But someone interrupted her from the back. "That's not policy, that's profiling." It didn't matter who said it. What mattered was that someone did. And once one voice said what others had only dared to think, it became harder for silence to survive. Julian didn't move, didn't smile. He just waited like he already knew how this ended. Emma Vega had 213 followers on TikTok, a florist from Santa Fe, first time flying Horizon, never meant to film anything today. But she had her phone in hand when Martin tore the boarding pass, had kept filming as Julian was told to move, as Lena tried to speak, as the champagne couple reclined into stolen comfort. She hadn't posted it yet. Until now. Caption: "This is what flying while black looks like in 2025. Hashtag he belongs. The upload button blinked blue. In row 6, a younger man, Michael, a freelance graphic designer, had also filmed. A different angle, capturing both crew and passenger reactions. He posted his, too. Caption boarding pass was real. Bias was louder. Within minutes, the clips were climbing. Not viral. Not yet. But alive, breathing in corners of the internet built to recognize injustice faster than airlines could deny it. Back on the plane, phones began vibrating. Screens lit up. The woman with the baby showed her partner. A teenage girl whispered, "This is trending." Martin, oblivious, paced the aisle, still pretending control. Brad, less sure now, muttered something about PR fallout under his breath. But it was too late. The story wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the cabin. And the cabin was talking. The whispers didn't just carry worry now. They carried recognition. The woman seated near the emergency exit, sharp suit, discreet gold earrings. The kind of presence that doesn't need volume, leaned toward her seatmate and whispered, "He looks familiar. From that Forbes article, the logistics guy." Her seatmate frowned. "Which one?" "You know, black founder, under 50. Built a shipping network bigger than FedEx in the Midwest." Her voice dropped. "Julian Cole." The seatmate blinked. No, that can't be. But the idea had already rooted itself, spread across the row, jumped diagonally, turned into ripples. Julian didn't respond. He kept his eyes on the cabin divider, as if counting something only he could see. The passengers began checking their phones, typing Julian Cole CEO into search bars. Photos loaded. One matched the man in seat 2A, gray sweater, short-trimmed beard, same calm intensity in his eyes. The confirmation didn't come from him. It came from the crowd. Lena, still tucked near the galley, felt her pulse surge. She hit record again. This time not just for evidence, but for legacy. Because something had shifted in her. Before today, she had believed protocol was protection. But now, she understood protocol, unchecked, becomes silence. And silence, left too long, becomes complicity. She raised her phone, not to confront anyone, just to keep remembering. Because the truth, she realized, deserved a place to live. And today, it would live in her voice. In a quiet office 3 time zones away, Rhonda Hayes was already 3 steps ahead. Julian's message, Cabin 1, Horizon 708, seat reassignment event, had triggered an automatic alert to Horizon Airlines' internal systems. The compliance flag went straight to the board. Within 11 minutes, an encrypted message landed in the inbox of every senior crew member on board. Subject: hold action, immediately from Executive Affairs, Horizon Airlines. Flight 708. Do not proceed with any further engagement with passenger Julian D. Cole. This is a protected stakeholder. Immediate review underway. Follow chain of command. Stand down. Martin never opened the message. Brad's tablet buzzed, he ignored it. The captain up front saw the alert, but by then, the cabin was already on fire. Only the security officer Wilkes read it in full, and her eyes widened. She didn't move forward again. She stepped back. Julian noticed, not her movement, but her hesitation. It was enough. The tide had already turned, and like most tides, it didn't shout when it came. It just swallowed. Julian stood, slowly. Not to argue, not to storm out, but because the moment had finally caught up to the truth. He reached into the inside pocket of his sweater. No rush, no showmanship, and withdrew a single black card. Not a boarding pass, not a corporate ID. It was a business card, heavy stock, matte, edges beveled, letters embossed in silver. Julian D. Cole, founder and CEO, CFI Global Logistics Board member, Horizon Airlines private class stakeholder. He held it out, not offering it to anyone, just letting it exist in the light. Martin saw it first. She blinked as if someone had thrown salt in her eyes. Brad leaned in, then recoiled. Julian's voice came then, the first sentence he had spoken in almost 20 minutes. "You've mistaken position for presence," he said. The words didn't echo. They landed, like weight on a beam already cracking. "I didn't come here to be seen," he continued. "I came to watch what happened when you thought I was no one." Then he placed the card on the tray table, folded his hands, and said nothing more. The silence after his words felt different. Not empty but dense, like air right before a downpour. Martin's mouth parted. Nothing came out. Brad looked toward the cockpit, hoping someone else would act. Wilkes, the officer, took one step forward, then froze. Her phone buzzed. A second email. "Same directive, do not proceed. He is known to the board." Then came Lena. Her blazer was wrinkled now. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her voice had grown a spine. "I have a recording," she said. No one looked at her, so she stepped closer. "I heard them. In the galley." Brad tried to wave her off. "This is a crew matter." She didn't stop. "They said his name didn't belong in first class, that it didn't fit the image." Martin flushed. "That's not what I—" Lena continued, voice steady now. "I didn't edit it. I didn't twist it. I just captured it, because truth should have a place to live." Julian turned just slightly and gave her the same nod he gave earlier. Not approval, not pride. Recognition. And in that gesture, Lena understood. He wasn't the one who had been exposed. They were. The aisle stopped being an aisle. One by one, passengers stood, not with fists or fury, but with bodies in front of Julian, beside Lena, between security and the truth. A man from row 4 moved first, sliding out of his seat like the decision had already been made before his legs obeyed. "If you touch him," he said quietly, "we're all witnesses now." A woman in row 6 joined, blocking the narrow pass between bulkhead and lavatory. "You're not removing him," she added. "Not for being right. Not on our watch." It wasn't a protest. It was a reckoning. Emma, the florist from Santa Fe, stood up and held her phone high, screen glowing, live, 8,000 viewers.
Michael, from the opposite aisle, followed suit. His caption read, "This is what accountability looks like."
More people stood. Some said nothing. Some whispered. Finally. Some just took each other's hands. Martin took a step back. "You're all obstructing FAA procedures." A passenger responded, "No, you are obstructing basic decency." Even the Eddingtons, once nestled in stolen comfort, shifted uneasily. Laura Eddington glanced down, her wine untouched. Julian remained seated. Not because he was afraid, but because they were finally standing. In the cockpit, the captain's console pinged again. "Subject urgent crew status alert termination. Pending staff under review M. Bradshaw. C. Martin." The words were short, clinical, but to those who understood the system, they were final. Martin's tablet vibrated, a red banner blinking across the screen, access restricted. Log privileges suspended. Brad's ID badge no longer worked on the cabin panel. He tried twice. Nothing. Panic bloomed in the corners of their faces. "Call legal," Martin whispered to the captain. "We need cover." The captain stared at her, silent, then back at Julian. He wasn't just a passenger anymore, he was the mirror. And the reflection was ugly. Brad muttered, "This is insane. We were just following protocol." Lena finally spoke. "No. You were following comfort. Yours." Behind her, a voice added, "You weren't enforcing safety. You were defending bias." That's when it hit them, not the punishment, but the irreversibility. The board wasn't reacting. The board had already decided. Every second they kept talking was another rope unraveling. And still, Julian hadn't stood. Because the ground was already shifting beneath them. Julian finally rose. No announcement, no gesture, just movement, deliberate, unhurried, the kind that carried more command than any uniform in the room. He looked around, not to scan, to connect. Each pair of eyes, each person who had stood, each one who chose to film, to witness, to believe. Then he spoke. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said, his voice smooth, firm, not loud, the kind of voice that fills a room without filling the air. He looked directly at Martin. "At any point, you could have looked at the pass, scanned the code, asked the question without assuming the answer." He turned to Brad. "You had a chance to pause, to listen, to let the evidence speak louder than your bias. Then finally, toward the whole crew. But you didn't, because you weren't trained to listen. You were trained to protect comfort, not conscience." A beat passed. "You didn't need to know I was a CEO," Julian continued. "You just needed to act like you knew what decency meant." Silence followed, not shameful, but reverent. Somewhere near the rear, a child whispered, "That man, he didn't yell once." Outside the window, the tarmac lights flickered like signals from a quieter world. And inside, in that cabin, a new kind of turbulence had finally settled. The announcement came over the cabin speaker like a sigh of relief. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will now resume boarding shortly. A new flight crew has been assigned. We thank you for your patience." A quiet rustle passed through the cabin, not the usual collective exhale before takeoff, but something more grounded, more earned. Brad and Martin were gone, escorted out silently through the service exit, stripped of title, clipped of access. Lena remained. She stood at the front of the cabin, unsure where to put her hands, eyes glancing between passengers who now looked at her, not with suspicion, but something closer to respect. A senior manager from Horizon HQ had boarded with the new crew, crisp suit, tablet in hand, accompanied by a woman with a velvet pouch. Julian stood nearby, still in the aisle. He said nothing. The manager approached Lena. "Per executive instruction," she said, tapping her screen. "You're being reinstated with full flight status." She opened the pouch. Inside silver wings. Real ones. Regulation issued. The symbol every junior crew member dreams of, but few receive under such weight. Julian took them. He didn't pin them with flourish, just handed them to Lena, steady as stone. "You didn't raise your voice," he said, "but you protected the truth." Lena blinked hard. "Thank you, sir." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Wear them like proof that silence doesn't always mean surrender." Passengers clapped soft, honest, no cheer, no fanfare, just recognition. A new beginning, mid-air. 8.2. You go first. Julian was invited to take his original seat. 2A. It was open now, polished, waiting. The champagne gone, the Eddingtons quiet. But as he approached, he paused. A slow hush fell again. People expected him to finally take what was his. Instead, Julian turned toward the back of the cabin. There she was. An older black woman in a pale blue dress suit and a wide-brimmed church hat, floral pin neatly fastened, gloves folded in her lap. She hadn't said a word this entire time, but her presence felt anchored, generational. Julian offered her his hand. "Ma'am," he said softly, "this was always meant to be yours." She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh no, baby, He cut in gently. "You go first." Gasps rippled through a few rows, not from shock, but from reverence. The woman stood slowly, touched his hand, then his cheek. "Your mother raised you right," she whispered. Julian smiled faintly. She tried. The world just kept getting in the way. Lena stood nearby, watching. It wasn't just a seat change. It was a restoration. Legacy wasn't something you claimed. It was something you passed forward. And for once, a first-class seat carried more than just leather and legroom, it carried memory. 8.332,000 feet and climbing. The aircraft lifted off 38 minutes behind schedule. But no one complained. Somewhere above the clouds, at cruising altitude, Julian finally sat. Not in 2A, but in the window seat of row 3, just behind where the church hat now rested. Brim tilted gently toward heaven. He placed his hand near the pane. Cold glass, endless dark sky outside. Beside him, a passenger nodded with respect but said nothing. Julian nodded back. There was nothing left to explain. He pulled out his phone. A message from Rhonda waited. Policy draft submitted. DEI council installed. Lena added to training leadership. Crew audit to begin this quarter. Board requests a quote for public statement. He typed one line. This wasn't revenge. This was repair. Then he closed his phone, leaned back. The wind outside pushed against the frame like memory. Below, cities glittered like maps rewritten. Inside, the cabin was calm, not because nothing had happened, but because something finally had. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.